In the early Middle Ages, the name Viking struck fear into the hearts of European villagers, monks, and even kings. From the late 8th century to the 11th century, Norse raiders from Scandinavia terrorized vast parts of Europe. Their victories were swift and brutal. Monasteries were plundered, coastal settlements burned, and even powerful kingdoms like Anglo-Saxon England trembled before them. But what made the Vikings so successful in war? How did relatively small bands of warriors manage to defeat more organized and numerically superior forces? The answers lie not only in their ships and weapons, but also in their mindset, strategy, and culture. To understand the Viking war machine, we first need to understand the longship. This iconic vessel was more than just a means of transport. It was a technological marvel. Longships were fast, flexible, and capable of navigating both open seas and shallow rivers. Their shallow draft allowed Vikings to sail up rivers like the Seine and the Thames, striking deep into enemy territory, bypassing fortresses and defensive lines. With their ability to beach almost anywhere, these ships enabled lightning-fast raids. A Viking war party could strike a monastery, loot its treasures, and disappear back down the river before any organized resistance could form. But mobility was only one aspect of their success. Viking warriors were feared not only for their ferocity, but also for their discipline and battlefield tactics. Contrary to the common image of berserkers charging wildly into battle, the average Viking war band was highly organized. They used shield walls, coordinated attacks, and often executed feigned retreats to lure enemies into ambushes. Their raids were calculated, and many were based on prior intelligence gathered through trade, exploration, or local allies. Perhaps even more important than tactics was the Viking warrior culture. In Norse society, war was not only a means of survival or wealth acquisition, it was a path to honor and eternal glory. Dying bravely in battle was considered a sure way to reach Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where fallen warriors would feast and fight until the end of the world. This belief gave Viking warriors a psychological edge. They feared death less than their enemies, and this fearlessness often broke the morale of those who faced them. Their enemies, meanwhile, were often divided, disorganized, and unprepared. When Vikings first raided the English coast, many kingdoms were still fragmented. The local lords lacked standing armies and relied on hastily gathered militias that stood little chance against battle-hardened Norsemen. Furthermore, the Vikings' unpredictability made them even harder to stop. One day they might appear along the Irish coast. The next week they'd be seen on the banks of the Loire in France. The political chaos of Europe also played into Viking hands. During the early 9th century, the Carolingian Empire began to fracture, leading to weakened borders and internal power struggles. In England, several competing Anglo-Saxon kingdoms left the island vulnerable. Instead of defending collectively, rulers often focused on their own territories, making it easy for Viking bands to divide and conquer. One of the lesser-known secrets behind Viking victories was their integration strategy. After initial raids, many Norse leaders began to settle in the lands they had conquered. They established Danelaws in parts of England, forged alliances through marriage, and even converted to Christianity when it suited their political goals. This adaptability allowed them to maintain long-term influence, not just by sword, but by diplomacy and cultural assimilation. Once they gained a foothold, they became part of the power structure, bringing Norse law, language, and military practices with them. Another key to Viking dominance was their decentralized leadership. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of European kingdoms, Viking warbands were often led by jarls, local chieftains who answered only to their followers. This allowed for more flexible decision-making and faster responses to changing battlefield conditions. It also meant that if one leader was killed, another could rise immediately. There was no single point of failure. Vikings were also skilled in psychological warfare. The brutality of their raids was often intentional. By burning monasteries and slaughtering priests, they sent a message: resistance is futile. This terror strategy caused some towns to surrender without a fight, paying tribute in silver and goods just to be spared. The term Danegeld refers to these payments, bribes paid by kings and local rulers to buy peace. Far from being simple raiders, the Vikings understood the value of using fear as a weapon. Trade played a surprising role in Viking warfare. While often remembered as pirates, many Vikings were merchants. Their trade routes stretched from Baghdad to Dublin, and they brought home not only wealth, but also knowledge. They learned about foreign weapons, fortifications, and tactics, and used that information to improve their own methods. Some even served as mercenaries in foreign armies, including the elite Varangian Guard of the Byzantine Empire. This experience made them more adaptable and exposed them to a wider range of military techniques. Another overlooked advantage was their technology. While Viking weapons were not vastly superior to those of their enemies, their craftsmanship was excellent. Swords, axes, and spears were forged with high-quality iron. Their armor, though often limited to wealthy warriors, was effective. But it was their use of everyday tools as weapons that also set them apart. The famous Viking axe, for example, was based on a tool used for woodcutting. Modified for war, it became a terrifying weapon capable of splitting shields and helmets. Even more importantly, Vikings mastered the use of terrain. In many battles, they chose when and where to fight. By launching surprise attacks at dawn, attacking during bad weather, or using river fog to conceal their movements, they gained the upper hand before the first blow was struck. European armies, often slow to mobilize, couldn't match their speed or their familiarity with guerrilla-style warfare. Despite their military success, the Vikings were not unbeatable. Over time, European kingdoms adapted. Fortified towns became more common. Coastal watchtowers and warning systems were developed. Kings began to establish standing armies, and eventually they learned to fight back effectively. But the impact of the Vikings was lasting. They reshaped the political and cultural map of Europe, founding cities like Dublin, influencing local languages, and leaving behind a legacy of maritime prowess and fearless exploration. In short, the secrets behind Viking victories weren't just in their swords or ships. They lay in their mindset, their adaptability, their use of fear, and their relentless drive to expand. The Norsemen combined speed, skill, and savagery in a way that overwhelmed their enemies for over 2 centuries. And even when they eventually faded from the battlefield, their influence lived on. In the kingdoms they shaped, the trade routes they opened, and the myths that still echo through history. Thanks for watching. On our channel, you'll find more in-depth stories about Vikings life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let us know what you think in the comments below. See you in the next video.